we can think of all of the objects here that we've saved as being in a kind of storage. I know that the storage is within the application and therefore it doesn't really mirror exactly what you would do with storing something in a database or on a hard drive, but it is data in storage. And at the moment when we move that data in storage, for example from home.ts, we push to the detail page the whole object, the whole inquiry. Now that's okay, it's a small local application, and when detail.ts picks it up, it gets the whole inquiry. Now this is okay here, as I say, small application, little bits of data, no problem at all. But when we scale up our application and start to use data from different sources, it would be very inefficient to keep all of the objects that we're passing from one place to another in memory. The whole object is in memory, so we would quickly consume the resources of the systems that we were using. So what we need to try and do is we need to try and work out a way of getting a reference to this data from a single object within it. And obviously you may have heard of IDs that are used in databases, and we use these IDs to refer to the rest of the record that's being stored. So that's exactly what we should do here. Instead of passing the whole object, we pass IDs, and then when we get to the point of delivery, we use the ID to get the rest of the data for us. So that's what's going to happen next. And the first thing we're going to do is to break the model we just made. Our data model here, our data set here, which is inside the inquiry service, is easily changed, and we can take each one of these in turn and add to it. And this is where I've said we're going to break the data model. And you already see the red line. It doesn't like this at all, does it? Because it says your model doesn't have this. But we'll fix that in just a moment. So I'm just going to change this here and do the rest of them. So I've added an ID field to each one of these particular records that we have here. And what we can do is we can go to the model and open up a space and put ID number, save, save, and all our errors have gone away. It now recognizes that our model is fine because we've said that it can contain a number which we are calling ID. Now what we need to do now is we need to start to use this ID in the places where we manipulate the data so that we can refer to the object and pass the ID around rather than the whole object. So what we'll do next is we'll go to home.ts. In home.ts, the way it's working now is we receive an inquiry in to the onItemClick function, which is of type inquiry, and that's fine. We can still receive an inquiry, but it's what we manage that's going to change. Instead of filling this variable inquiry with the whole inquiry object that's been passed in here, we'll change the variable name to ID, and we're just going to pass the dot ID part of the component. Now that's really powerful stuff, as you can see, because it now shows you that the autocomplete on inquiry, which follows this model, knows about this, so it knows it can have an ID. So that's what we've done with home.ts. So I think we should save that. And now instead of pushing the whole inquiry object to the next page, we're just pushing the inquiry ID. So if we now go to detail.ts, we'll make some changes here to receive the ID that's coming through. So in this constructor, when we navigate into this page, the constructor fires, and what is happening is that in this line of code here, we are getting the object inquiry under the old regime. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this from this dot inquiry to a new variable, which is a constant, and we're going to say that that constant should be ID. So that's fine. We're now getting the ID from the navigation params because it was passed as the ID from here, and we're now picking it up in this line here. Now what we need to do is we need to write the assignment of what we're returning in this line here. We didn't pass the whole object into this function, so what we need to do is turn it into an object, an inquiry object again, because we need to display it, by using a function that we haven't yet created. So there will be some complaining from the code about this. What we need to do is this dot inquiry, which is perfectly legitimate, equals inquiry service dot get inquiry, which this is the function that doesn't yet exist, based on a parameter so it's moaning a bit about this. So don't worry, we're going to fix that almost straight away. And the way in which we do is that we create this function inside our inquiry service code. That will then fix this. So let's do that next. So to create our inquiry, get inquiry code, we're going to go underneath the array of objects, of data objects. I'm just making a little bit of space so that it's more obvious as to what we're doing. And our function is called get inquiry. And it has parameters, which is an inquiry, inquiry ID, which is a number. Put the body of the function there. So I'm going to type this out quite slowly. What a function does is it returns something. So that's our first instruction. So what are we going to return? We're going to look inside this dot inquiries. Yeah, and then we're going to use a built-in ionic stroke angular function which works with TypeScript called find. Now the find method will search through the inquiries as long as we give it an accurate description of what to find. And this accurate description is called the predicate, and we have to describe it using an expression that you won't have seen before. And this is called an arrow function. And if you've used lambda at all, you'll recognize this kind of straight away. Three equal signs to make sure that it's exactly equal, that it won't try and interpolate the data types. Remembering this ID here is going in here, and that's our function. So we want to return. So what we need to do now is just make sure that this works. So I'll just double check my code. Oh, I've still got the red line. Ah, I know what it is. I've been passing this constant under the wrong name, so that should help that. So what I need to do is do File, Save All, because I've got the two files that I've changed, and hopefully our data will still display. It does indeed. And we move from one to the other, absolutely the same as before. So what we want to do now is think about what's happening when we move with this data. If I take this one, for example, Mariam's record here, and do exactly the same changes I did before, you'll remember this. 526642, and go back, her number has changed. Now that's not a good behavior in every case, because what we might want to do is that when we go to edit this, we may want the user of this record, or the editor of this record, to actively commit it so that it's not automatically updating the record which is held here in memory. Remember that the record here is the same record in memory, so when we change it here, it is changed there. So what we want to try and do is to make sure that we can go to the next step, which will be to say that we shouldn't automatically save it once we edit it. And that's what we'll do next. In the inquiry service, what's returning here is a reference to the object. It's the one that's found in the inquiries array with this predicate being the find criteria. So what we want to do now is we want to change what's done. Is we're going to change that to constant inquiry equals. So we're now just getting this inquiry. And then what we'll do is we'll turn this inquiry into an an object which is separate from the one we found. It's the same data in it, but it's separate from the one that's referenced in memory here. So we can do return object dot assign. And that's a method. I like to go to the end and put my semicolon in there. And what we want to do is return an object based on inquiry. Let's just go through that again. Instead of returning the whole object, we're now just going to return an inquiry. And we're going to pass that inquiry so that this object assign passes that inquiry into this object and returns that to the new page. So what we'll do now is we'll just Control S and we should see no change. Let's go to here. If I now change Mariam's to 4.2 and go back, the original record is the same. So what we'll do is that when we are editing this now, the next stage that we will complete is that we will say that if I change this to 4.2, we'll put a button somewhere on the form to commit that change so that when we go back, this will be 4.2. So that's a really good step to take.